Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Reverse the Verse Live. This week, all about Alpha 3.5. And our guest this week probably needs no introduction, but we haven't had him on the show in a while, so we're going to do it anyway. Chris, tell us who you are and what you do for Star Citizen.
Well, I'm the janitor. I travel between the different studios to make sure all the floors are clear.
I told you I'm going to have every department on this show by the time we're done. We have janitorial on today.
So, yeah, I have a bit of work to do around here, but...
It's a working studio.
And in my spare time, I work on this small game called Star Citizen on Squadron 2.
Small game. Yeah, just a tiny little game. All right, so Chris, Reverse the Verse, in case this is your guys' first show for whatever reason, it's our weekly Q&A series where we take questions live from members of the Star Citizen community. So you can submit your questions in one of two places, either live in the Twitch chat where we're broadcasting now, where you can preface your question with the word question in capital letters surrounded by brackets. It helps our community management team pull it out from all the other conversation and emojis and icons that are going on. You can also submit your questions live on Spectrum, which is our bespoke communication platform on robertspaceindustries.com. Same process. Question, brackets, help us identify your questions. To get things started, we were collecting questions throughout the week like we normally do.
Yep.
That also has the added advantage of letting people vote up their questions. So we're going to start with some of the highest voted questions that actually apply to Alpha 3.5. There were a lot of questions in there that were maybe a bit more forward-facing. We're going to get to those later in the show. We're not going to ignore them, but we want to start with our Alpha 3.5 questions since that is the subject of the day, and we've got a patch incipient right now. It's on our PTU. Start with the flight model. Probably one of the biggest features. Okay, ArcCorp is probably the biggest feature, but for a lot of our backers, the flight model, the new flight experience, has been something we've been talking about for a while. How happy are you with it? Is it where you were expecting?
Well, it's a step in the right direction. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that still has to be dialed in. We've got aspects of it that aren't finished. So, the next quarter, one of the things we're working on is sort of the VTOL hover stuff. So we've got we've actually, on our internal stuff, we already have done a lot of work on it, and so we've been playing around with it. It's quite nice, which is going to make the sort of low speed hover stuff much, they just feel better and give you a little bit more control, and also sort of play into the sort of the takeoff and land. I mean, because really, like, with the remodel of the flight model, we wanted to get more realistic, as in, the maneuvering thrusters couldn't, put out 6 or 7 Gs in every direction, and were at least as strong as the main engine, which was like 10 times as big visually. So we wanted to sort of go closer to what it should be like, maybe not 100, like the Expanse does a pretty nice job of sort of, I don't even want to call it sort of, it's still science fiction, but it's got a little more sort of science fact behind it. And so, your main thrusters, your main engines should provide most of your thrust, and the maneuvering jets are helping maneuvering, and generally they should be more useful in space and less useful in atmosphere. And atmosphere may be, various, lift surfaces, whether it's your wings or tail or whatever, would help you to move. Yeah, so we wanted to move towards a more realistic model where, if you had a ship that had atmospheric features, which we have quite a lot of, they give you they have an advantage in atmosphere over a ship that's not as atmospheric, friendly, so to speak. So like,
The Herald.
Yeah, like the Herald, that would be a good example of one. It isn't so atmospheric friendly. Or the Starfarer is like a big tanker. And so we wanted to have that, and I think that I can already see it. I can see people flying it, people having fun, seeing the difference between the atmospheric and the out in space, and the fact that the maneuvering thrusters are a lot less powerful than they used to be, and that you can get additional forces from lift on your wings if you've got more aerodynamic ship. So all that aspect's good. The sort of VTOL hover side of stuff will sort of enhance things, because like really what should happen on a really big ship where it really doesn't have the power of its, here we go. Well, this isn't a big ship, it's a Knox, but basically, like say a Starfarer, right? So a Starfarer should be able to slowly push its way up, but it doesn't really have much more than say like 1G or something in terms of being able to go up here. So then you have to engage your main engines to sort of go forward and start to go like that, and then that's how you would like leave the atmosphere, right? And if something had big main engines that rotate down, then they could probably go like this pretty easy, or much lighter craft. But I think it would give a more realistic sort of takeoff and entry. And I think with some of the VTOL and hover changes that we're going to bring in for 3.6, landings it'll be cooler and better. And, we'll also be able to get that sort of, kind of, I don't know, what you normally see in movies or helicopter gunship kind of things where you can sort of be hovering and, like doing this. So the Valkyrie and stuff could be cooler with some of the newer stuff that we're doing. So we're doing that. We also have, there's a bunch of stuff that's moved in that work with the flight model, although it's not fully finished out. So we're still trying to balance the kind of component and the heat system and the power system. Right. So there's some hiccups. I mean, this is the first time all these things are working together. And in fact, some of these items and components, a lot of the aspects of the power system and the heat system weren't properly working before. So we finally got them to be working. And now, of course, there's, we got, I don't know, it's like 80 plus actual flyable ships. So making sure all that stuff works and is balanced is going to be an ongoing task over quite a few patches. So, this first one, there's some cases where it's like, oh, well, this is, not necessarily, what people would call fun or balanced, but when you start to sort of dial that in and also bring in more aspects. So like one of the big things for the next patch is sort of the wear and the tear and the misfires on items. So as the item gets used more, and if it's a lower quality, it potentially could have a misfire or have a critical failure, and that would impact systemically like the ship itself and its operation. So, whether it's a thruster doing that or it's a power plant or a cooler doing that, then it would have a negative impact on your ship's performance, and you would see it because it's all done systemically. So I guess the short story on the flight model is I think that we've made the right changes. It's not finished yet. It's going to be a continual work in progress. We also have some other aspects like the EVA and the missile flight guidance system that we need to switch to use the newer system from the older system. This newer system's a lot more it's a lot more efficient in terms of processing time and power, which is good because that means we can have more ships out there, AI ships, more player ships. So in general, I think it's a very good step in the right direction. I think from what I can see from the feedback I've seen so far in PTU, in general, people like the changes. I know there's some, debate back and forth on aspects of it or aspects in combat. And I also sort of think that there's so many variables still to sort of play into this that it's not going to, people are going to have to sort of learn how to do things differently. Right. So I sort of feel like people did things the old way and now this new way. Some people are, a little sort of like everyone is when things change. They're like, I don't like it. This is a new way. But I think there will be more variety and there'll be more potential with all the things that have arrived and will be coming in. That will just allow for a lot more interest and options for players, especially in the PU, because it's not just about combat, right? It should be about a lot of other things like flight as well as the combat and how you're getting around between places. And we've got a lot of aspects that we don't really have right now in the PU, like we were showing in Squadron, where there's a coil, which is this sort of huge gas cloud nebula that has, it's kind of dangerous, and but
it affects all your components.
Well, and also just like how you would, it's in its way its own little atmosphere, so you would perform differently in it. But we'll have versions, not necessarily of the, specifically the coil everywhere, but there'll be areas where you would go in to say scoop and collect fuel, for instance, and there'll just be all sorts of different, textures of experience that you can have out in space and down on planets. And so that was one of the bigger reasons to sort of move to a more systemic model. So, I mean, there's definitely more systemic modeling of, say, the thruster, thrusters get damaged, and especially when they start to misfire, which will be sort of in the next patch. I think it will be interesting. And I think we'll start to see over time, people realize some of the subtleties, and then there will be different strategies and techniques that people use. And so I think, in general, I think it's a really good step. It's not finished yet, but I'm quite happy with the direction we're taking, and from my sense, on a community side, I think that most people like it too. So,
oh yeah,
there you go.
I had about 3 follow-up questions to that, and you ended up hitting them before I could ask them. So I'm just going to move on to the next one. Give me something to do here, Chris.
What were the ones that you say I ticked off?
Well, you mentioned heat. Let's talk about heat for a second. Why have the heat limitations in quantum been extended to the larger ships than the single seat fighters. It seems like when I'm watching Twitch streams or even in my own limited play experience, ships seem to be overheating trying to get to where they're going. I don't know if it's as fast as they should be or not. What can you tell us about the current state of heat?
Well, in terms of quantum,
Yeah,
the quantum side they still need to dial in. I mean, the concept with the quantum side is that the small sort of single-seater ships really aren't built to sort of travel across the system just in one go. And there's a reason why you would want a bigger ship like a Freelance or a Constellation, or go even bigger. Like, okay, I want to take a bunch of cargo in a whole sea, or I want to fly in my Idris and go from one side of the system to the other side. So the concept has always been that the bigger ships are they may not be faster, but they're better at extended travel, right? Gotcha. So extended quantum travel. And like this would be a reason, for instance, like, okay, I've got a Idris and I've got some Gladius. Now, I want to get from one side of the star system to the other one. Well, maybe that Idris can do that in like 2 quantum jumps or travels or whatever we want to call them. But if I did that from one side of the star system to the other side of the star system in the Gladius, it could take me 10 or 12, right? So that's why the Gladius is on the Idris, and then you do the long travel, and then when you get to where you want, the Gladius launches. I mean, it's just the same reason, like in the real world. It's like, yeah, that nuclear carrier can just pretty much drive around for forever, but the F-18s that you're launching for it certainly can't, circumnavigate the globe. So that's the concept. In terms of it being dialed in for the ships, that's an ongoing process right now. So I think right now it's not necessarily dialed in, right? The way I would sort of feel it is something like a Freelance or a Constellation really should be able to sort of jump from one planet to another planet. Now it shouldn't be able to do it from like one side of the star system to the other side. It would take several. But a bigger ship like a Idris or a Claimer could, they could do multiple, span, almost a star system or half a star system or whatever you want to take it. And sort of the limiting factor that we were considering, which is because we have this heat mechanic and the cooling mechanic, is that the quantum drive itself is creating this sort of magnetic field around your ship that's sort of pulling you forward, but that takes a lot of energy and generates heat and requires cooling. So the bigger ships have, first of all, they have the bigger power plants, but the bigger cooling capacity, so they can really deal with it. And like if you look at the Idris and you see the power plant in the Idris, I think we've showed it off in a, it's like submerged in a pool of like coolant, right? So cool so that's kind of the concept, that you just don't have the room or the equipment to be able to do that on the smaller ships, but as you get bigger, you have more capacity for that. So it's kind of nice because, yes, the big ships can't fly as fast, they can't maneuver as fast, but they have the advantage of the distance. And so I think what people have been complaining about is just the, not that concept, but we haven't dialed it in yet. It's not dialed in. So like, I think I was talking to John Crew this morning about it, because I know just knew this question was coming up, and I'm like, okay, well, and he's like, well, it's, from this planet to this planet, it's like 90% of the way you get there with a medium ship. Well, okay, so we're, if that's a Freelance or economy, should be able to get the whole way, unless you're interdicted or there's some obstacle in the way. But so that's a matter of sort of dialing in the numbers. But for me, it's the concept that I just talked about is very important. It's like that gives you a reason to have the bigger ships, because they're the ones that you can travel the greater distances with. And that's why you would sort of have a bigger ship that you would like have your smaller snub-nosed fighters or the Gladiuses or whatever landed on board. If you sort of were traveling around. So because what we want to do is have a reason for all these different size ships. We don't want someone to be able to sort of just get in an Aurora and just do a jump across the star system the same way that you should be able to do that, say, with a much larger ship.
All right. Let's switch gears to another feature of Alpha 3.5, the facial customization system, which we just showcased on ATB yesterday. If you haven't had a chance to check that out, check that out.
Yeah, it's very cool.
The question from the chat said, is there any way that we could expose a numerical representation of a player's custom configuration as a genome so players could get characters that are twins, siblings, or people who aren't interested in role-playing, who just want their avatar to look the same after every single death of a spaceman? And we actually did show the DNA genome on the segment.
Yeah. So we have talked about exposing it in much the same way. I don't know if anyone's gone to car configurator that you can do online for a lot of different car manufacturers, and you can say, oh, I want this color, and you do your sort of customization of the car, and it gives you like a lot of times a code,
Right.
and then if that code gets plugged into that configurator, or you
your
can send it to your
options are back
ship dealer, it's all there. So we've definitely considered sharing that. The other stuff that we've got a whole bunch of stuff that we're going to work on for this quarter, Q2 3.6, so there'll be a lot more on the DNA. So what we've just seen right now is the beginning. So we actually have some pretty cool stuff going forward, so there'll be more options, more variety. We're actually going to overhaul a little bit of the user experience to make it easier to sort of sculpt and model your head in a much more sort of 3D manner. So what we see right now is good, but we've got a whole nother level that I think is going to go beyond that we think is going to be more intuitive and easier to sort of make the head that you want. And it's also part of what we need for Squadron anyway, so it's going to go in the specific Squadron, what do you call it, the Calliope machine or whatever. So that will be very cool. And the other stuff that we've talked about is the possibility of, like, as you, like we have the death of the spaceman, and you pass on to your next of kin, some element of your DNA is surviving, and then you're just sort of modifying from there. And we're still discussing the possibility of like blending a male and a female together, right? I mean, you can blend multiple males together and multiple females together, but male and females slightly more challenging because the actual rig itself is different. Like in the DNA system, there's a proto rig for a male, and there's a proto rig for a female, and there is a slight difference in the mapping between those two in the bones. So we would have to have a smart way of converting it. But it would be really great to say, oh yeah, here was my mother, here was my father, and this is what I look like, and then you can do some modifications from there or whatever. So those are all things that are on the table, but we will have a lot more hairstyles. I mean, right now the hair is pretty weak. Yeah. So we have a whole new hair shader setup that isn't in 3.5 right now, but our plan is to release it with the next one with new sets of hair, and that will be an ongoing process. So it won't be all this new hair, like that's it, no more hair, and that's all you get in 3.6. It will be like, okay, we'll roll out some of them and then continue to roll them out. So because the current hair assets were built using an older technique, so this newer technique will create better hair, and we'll just sort of slowly just be adding new styles. We're considering facial hair, beards, mustaches, and a bunch of other stuff. So it's gonna be cool.
I'm glad you said beards and mustaches. Chat, that's all, I think that's all chat wanted to know there. Beards and mustaches? Yes. Beards that have 14 different colors?
I don't know. Go talk to Josh.
I've talked to Josh.
I think it's possible.
I think my beard terrifies Josh. I know you, Josh. All right, let's move to ArcCorp. ArcCorp, obviously the new planet that we've added in 3.5. There are a lot of buildings, and many of them have hangars on top, or not hangars, but landing platforms on top that are even recognized by the HUD and stuff like this. This question just says, what are they for? Player housing, missions?
So that's sort of like the early stubbing in for additional content around ArcCorp. So what the longer term plan is that there could be a building and you could get a mission to go in there and, I don't know, take out a crime boss or something. So if you look at those hangars, there is actually you can go down stairways, there's a door, we just don't have it open at the moment. Right. But the concept is to add procedural content, so not too dissimilar to, for instance, the underground facility that you have in Hurston. Right. Here in ArcCorp, so we places delivery missions or maybe even some combat missions or whatever. And then on top of that, on a longer term plan, we have sort of the first stage of persistent hubs right now, which means that like if you get this hub and you have your stuff and move it around or leave things there, when you come back, it will still be your hub will still have those things in those kind of positions, so how you arrange it and do everything. But the real long-term goal is that you get an actual, as a starting player, you get your starting, apartment hub, whatever you want to call it, and it's always like building 5, apartment 20A. That's always yours. It's not like that changes every time you log on to a different server. And obviously in something like ArcCorp, there is a vast amount of buildings, so there's plenty of space, even if we have tens of millions of players. But the longer term of the persistent HAB system is to allow you a persistent location. And then one of the challenges of that is like, okay, well, there could be 1,000 building blocks then that any one of our players could do because they have their own persistent address.
Right.
How do they get to those? So one of the discussions or one of the ideas is there's landing pads on top, because then you could just fly to your own little apartment. And then we just have to figure out how you get to the sort of the central area. Is there a bus service that goes, runs to 1,000 places, or is there a little sky taxi that can come get you? But those are the kind of things that we're talking about. Like we were talking about, like in Hurston, if you expand it, it's along the rail line, and then you go, and maybe there's a place that has, 3 or 4 buildings off a plaza, and that's just that's repeated around different areas of the city. And so, just every time we add more players and it gets filled up, we open up a new one of those sections and go from there. So that's the longer term plan for it. So people would have their own like real estate. The idea is you should be able to start, like everyone will get their starting location, and then, in other planets or even on this planet, you could go and sort of get yourself, oh, I want the big penthouse. Well, I get this, bowling penthouse on the top, but that's a, 10 million credit place. I've got to earn enough money in games so I can go buy that place. So that would be the other aspect. And then I know one other question that was on this was about windows.
Why did the player HABs not have any windows?
And so that is actually something I've talked with Ian about, how we can, I'd like to be able to build it. So not all the HAB, because in apartment complexes the same. Right. Not every apartment complex has necessarily windows, but there certainly should be some of them that have a view. So that is a long-term goal for us, is to sort of build that in, so you can wake up and open the shutters of your HAB and see the sunrise across the skyline.
Area 18, that's the landing zone in ArcCorp right now. A very highly voted question was, is this the only landing zone that we're going to see on ArcCorp? Are there plans to do in Area 17?
So it is not going to be the only one, although it's going to be the only one until we've sort of fleshed out the Stanton system. So our sort of goal that we're trying to do on the Stanton system right now is get all the planets in and get all the basic landing zones in, right? So, and then we're going to go, as we're also creating other systems, we're going to go and sort of be expanding the existing stuff. So, you could see more areas open up in Lawville, you could see more areas open up in ArcCorp, you could ultimately see more areas open up in Microtech, et cetera. But at first we want to get Lawville, Hurston, Lawville working, ArcCorp Area 18 working, Microtech New Babbage working, Crusader Orison working, and then we sort of, you've already seen a little bit of, like in this release, there's now a small, but there's a direct line from the spaceport to the business district,
right,
which makes sense, right? Because it's like, that was how it would be done. Yeah. We didn't have time when we did the early release. So our goal is, as we're improving things, so we still have things to do in the city tech. This is our first iteration. As everything it gets better. So there's a lot of lighting stuff that we can't do just yet in terms of real-time kind of illumination, global illumination and stuff. And we have plans for it. Just those are bigger projects. But in something like ArcCorp, where there's all these buildings where there's a lot of artificial light, and between night and day it can be quite different, and you want sort of the lighting effects and the shadowing to feel better. So I think we've done a pretty good job with the tools that we already have, but it can be a lot better, and so that'll be stuff that will be improving, and then also improving kind of the fidelity of the buildings, and taking maybe some of the stuff that we've improved for ArcCorp and then bringing it back into some of the Lawville buildings, which the first pass of Lawville was lower poly than some of the stuff that we have in ArcCorp, right? So it's just an ongoing process that we get the Stanton system doing out, we get the base landing things, and then we'll start to improve those while we're doing the other systems. And as we go, we learn more and how to make everything work better and be efficient and stuff.
You're probably a little too high level for this, but I'm going to ask you because I want to see what your answer is. What's the deal with the turtles?
The turtles.
The tortoise, the turtle.
Right. I actually didn't know, so I had to I had to ask Ian. So basically, Ian said he one of the references that we have for ArcCorp was sort of Hong Kong and stuff. Mm-hmm. So he sort of remembered your back alleyways. There was little, all these sort of slightly shady, hawking anything vendors, and he remembered a bunch of tortoises in cages. And so he wanted to get some of that element in. The prop team led by Ben Curtis, they like to do fun things, and So they did it and put it in, and now I see endless posts about turtles, tortoise. But yeah, so it's kind of cool. Yeah, I mean they all like to throw in fun things occasionally.
It just, I've been living in 3.5 the last quarter, making
Doesn't
a
move,
weekly.
though. It needs to be. We need one like proper.
Needs to be able to walk
Moving around.
Yeah, I didn't think I could be surprised by anything in 3.5. Then I see turtles, and I'm like, how the hell did I not know about turtles? I am curious what happens if people take them back to their habs and see if they persist, if they can build a turtle collection or not.
I believe they do.
See if I haven't seen that yet. I'm challenging the Star Citizen community to see if that can happen. All right. Before we move on from ArcCorp, let's talk about the let's talk about the no-fly zone.
Okay.
Talk about the no-fly zone. What's the deal there? Is ArcCorp going to always be just covered in no-fly zone?
Well, I mean, the idea with ArcCorp, I mean, we want you to fly between the buildings. I've already seen people doing videos. So we have a kind of hard deck that below you're really not meant to go below, and then your IFC's meant to take over. I'm not sure, right now we're fighting through some issues with getting all that to work well and have the right performance. But ultimately, I mean, the idea is that we don't really want players taking their spaceships and landing them in the central plaza because it would be a problem. Yeah. So we want to prevent you from doing that. We don't want to blow you up if you do that, though. What we would rather do is, take over your ship or fly you away, or if you get in that, rather than blow you up, you just fades to black, and then you fades up, and you're in a jail cell in ArcCorp or whatever, for unauthorized flying, and your ship's impounded. You have to pay a credit fine to get it back, but we definitely don't want to kill you, and we also don't want to have too much HUD AR visual stuff that gets in the way of the pretty city. It just
covers you out.
Yeah, you want to see the city, right? It's silly. So we've been talking about ways of. So even the current, I think it's improved in 3.5, but it's still probably too much. So that will be something we'll be continuing to work on.
It's a hard balance because even in the real world today, you can't take your Cessna and fly it over any part of the city and land it on any street in LA.
You got to keep away from the LAX airspace space. And if you do something like that, you will be in trouble.
Yeah.
Right, unless you're having an emergency landing that you had to do and you had to land on the street. But even then, it's dangerous. So yeah, I mean, what we really don't want to do is we just don't want someone just taking their hammerhead and crashing it into the central plaza, trying to kill as many players in AI as possible. Yeah.
But it makes sense from a lore point, is what I was getting at, because with less than 0.1% of humans own private airplanes, and you can't fly them anywhere you want today. 940 years from now, when everybody owns a private airplane.
Well, not everyone's going to own a private. No, in our world, not everyone owns private airplanes. You're playing one of the, whatever you want to call it, maybe not the top 1%, but the top 5%.
Gotcha. Let's see, what else do we got? Let's talk a little bit about the HUD. Let's move away from ArcCorp. Let's talk about the HUD in 3.5. This question says, what is your vision for addressing visor clutter? Can we expect a cleaner HUD experience in the future? This person was really enjoying the no HUD bug that the female character had at the moment.
Yes, absolutely. So the current state of the player and the vehicle UI is absolutely not even close to what we want as the final state. And it's sort of become more and more messy over the years as we sort of added features, but it's not been considered holistic. I mean, I kind of sort of feel like in some ways our best version of the HUD was all the way back in, when we did the dogfighting module. So we're actually engaging in a kind of full reconcept of how everything should feel and look. It's not coming online yet because it's going to take a while, and but we basically want to build it so it has real character, it's usable, and also different manufacturers have different feels, and it's a lot more contextual. So for instance, like the visor clutter, right? Like if I'm sitting in my cockpit and I've got my two monitors here, and I should have my ship starter should be here, my ship target should be here, which is exactly how Wing Commander worked, right? I don't need to have these two big things cluttering up my visor unless perhaps I want to say, oh, look, I want to cast this to my visor, and you'd have a button on the MFD to cast it up there, and it can be contextual where it gets smaller or bigger, depending. I mean, like right now, there's a huge X there. If there's no target, why would you waste space like that? You want to have as uncluttered view as possible. So there's several things. One is the feel and look of that. The second is working on the tech itself to change, to make it much easier for us to implement it. So up until very recently, We've relied very much on Flash and Scaleform, which is sort of a game implementation of Flash, and it's very difficult. Not that many people work in Flash anymore anyway, and it's just awkward. So we've started about a year ago. We've been building our own sort of UI building block set to not have to deal with ActionScript, not have to deal with Flash. It's a totally different thing, and it's been led up by Zane and Bone, who's a senior lead UI engineer. And so they're starting to pull it together where we have these various different building blocks that we can put together, and it should be much easier for the game teams to implement the UI art and quicker, because right now it's one of the reasons why our UI, like the UI is a bit, it's just hard to get UI resources to deliver all the needs of UI we need for like DNA, or we need for cockpits, or we need for Mobi glass screens or whatever. So we are going to fix it. It's going to be much better. There you go.
Chat is going crazy, going Flash in 2019.
Yeah.
For those of you who are also saying that we're pre-recorded. I told you when we did the one pre-recorded episode. All right, let's stay on the HUD for a bit. Let's talk a bit about the HUD against bright backgrounds, white backgrounds. You know, the sun is obviously very bright. We have a couple snow-covered planets or moons rather, that are very white. This seems like an easy fix. You know, the community is very good, like, put a drop shadow on there or whatever. Why is this persisting? What are we doing about this?
Well, we did do some things, whether it was brightening or looking at putting a drop shadow, and we haven't finished. That definitely will require more work. I mean, from our standpoint, since we are trying to refactor the UI tech, so we're moving to a sort of our own system that's more flexible, that is much more sort of 3D object or holographic object centric. Because all this stuff is sort of engineering time on graphics, and everyone's got 2 years worth of work in their backlogs. So we didn't really want to focus too much time on a dead system and have that sort of come in more with our new system. Because in the old way, it's too patchwork in terms of how the various elements get displayed. It's too custom. It's a pain. So we'd rather sort of change things out and then work at like a more unified shader. So we've done some stuff to improve it, but yes, we haven't finished, and we will. That is something we would like to make a better solution, whether it's more a drop shadow or it's sort of detecting kind of like what the value of the background is and adjusting to that on a more sort of dynamic basis.
Okay. One more question about 3.5 before we start jumping into the future stuff. So we have you here, and we know people always want to know what's coming, whatever. Let's talk about the FPS in ArcCorp right now. It's not super.
It sucks. Basically,
you can say that. I can't say that.
The problem that we have is that the client-side object container streaming made a massive difference for the client frame rates, which is, people can see it. You've seen people play 60 plus frames a second. But on the server, since we are not doing the streaming, as we add more content, so we've got all the moons, we've got Hurston, we've got Lorville, now we have ArcCorp and Area 18 and all the stuff. Just the object and the entity count on the server increases. Just keeps increasing as we add more of this content. So, I think we have something like 330,000 entities that's been updated on the servers. So our server frame rates are, we've done actually quite a lot of optimization on our entity updates and a bunch of others. So if we had exactly the same as we had in 3.4, you would see an uptick in the server performance. The problem is, because we've now just added a whole nother planet and a bunch more moons and a bunch more entities that are sitting around all the time on that one server, the server is the bottleneck right now. So the server starts to get slow, like really slow. Our target for the server ultimately is we want to be at 30 frames a second, but now the servers could be like 10 frames a second or 5 frames a second, and that manifests it on the client side because the things are moving around on the server at a much lower fidelity than they are on the client, and that's why sometimes you can see jumps or jitters even if you've got a decent frame rate on the client side. And object container streaming on the server is what will fix that, and it's also the first stage of server meshing. So like the concept would be that you're playing the game and there's a server that only has ArcCorp streamed in and Area 18 streamed in, and it's just simulating that. And then there's the one that's doing the same for Hurston, and there's one that's doing the same for a moon or whatever. And as you as a player, you go between these locations, you're getting handed off to these different servers, and the server's dynamic and can stream in whatever area they care about simulating. So that's the first step so the very first step of server meshing and which needs to have the object container streaming. It's basically the object container streaming plus the very first step of the server meshing is we have sort of servers that handle areas, and they're sort of static. And then the final version of that is that's just sort of fluid. It's always just spinning up and adding servers as it needs it for load. So that's kind of what we are working on that right now. So we have our top men, and then we really have top men, not the Raiders of the Lost Ark version of top men, like Christopher Balti and Steve Humphreys and stuff. This is Chad McKinney. This is what we're working on for to get going, because we won't be able. It's the same problem we had. Without the object container streaming, we really couldn't have added the Hurston on the client side, and unless we get our server stuff up and running, which is happening right now, we're working on this, we won't be able to get the full Stanton system with all this detail all working at once, because the servers themselves get bottlenecked because outside of the entity updates, we still have the issue on physics, where the physics is sort of constrained to a limited number of threads, and we're working on the physics system to stop that. So like this physics system will move from this sort of parallel threaded system, which has 4 separate physics threads running, to a what we call a phase batch model, which would be that you update all the entities, and every core in the server just does all the entities together. They all work together, get it done, and then once you do that, then you update all the physics. Every core does it. Then you do all the rendering with every core, which is not on the server, but in the client you would do it. But that's what the phase model is. So instead of being parallel, you basically do things in steps, like, okay, update entities, update physics, update animation, render, right? And then as you do each one of those phases, you use every single core you possibly can on the computer to do that work, so it gets done much quicker. So so we're moving from the parallel threaded model to the phase batch model, which is, we've already done a lot of that. That's a lot of what we've been talking about on the entity system, and we've been moving over to that. On the rendering side, that's why like moving to Vulkan is important, because Vulkan allows you to do that. Like we can't do that with DX11. Right. Doesn't matter how many cores are working on it. Like you've got a constrained pipe in DX11, but in Vulkan you can do a whole bunch of stuff in parallel. So we're moving to that, and that will allow us. So combination of that with the sort of object container streaming, first stage meshing on the servers will allow us to these star systems expand out, and we're doing all this stuff. So that's all the background tech work that's happening right now.
That's all.
All right. You asked.
We leave the camera on Chris most of the times, because I'm just sitting here like, that's so easy when Chris is on.
Well, it's not that easy. That's why it's taking a lot of time, and there's a lot of people working on it.
No, I mean it's easy to do these shows when you're here, because you hit my next questions. Okay, so you brought up server meshing. That's one of the big buzzwords. Persistence is one of our big buzzwords. We talked about the pillars at CitizenCon that we need to get to where we want to go. Let's just do a quick kind of update for persistence. How is it? Where are we at now? How are we looking? Is there anything we can share?
Okay, so I mean, there is a level of persistence now, like for instance, what you leave on your ship or what you leave in your hab now should persist. Obviously, what happens to your items, their state and stuff should persist, between patches, right? I mean, not between patches, but during the patch, and then when we do it with the database. But we're doing a complete refactor of the whole database, the item cache, and that's sort of the other big sort of hand-in-hand job that's happening with object container streaming and server meshing. So we can much easier, like we can persist everything. So the goal is, if I'm running around and I drop my gun in the woods somewhere in Hurston, and I leave, I come back, that gun will be there. And obviously there'll be some limitation, like if we'll only allow so many objects in certain areas, and if someone was sort of, when everyone's not looking, the gun and say, oh, well, someone probably just came by and took that gun and got rid of it. We'll do sort of garbage cleanup if there's too much stuff there. But the idea is that fluidly you can persist anywhere in the game, whether it's in space, whether it's on a planet, whether it's inside a room or a location. So we're refactoring the database to be able to allow to do that and do that in an efficient manner and way. So properly persist states, objects and locations, which also is necessary. So if you as a player decide, oh, I'm going to set my base down here, and you put your own little outpost somewhere, that persists, right? So we're building the structure to do that. And then the other thing that's actually quite important for me, and I think everyone on the game side, is we currently wipe the database between patches. We don't want to do that. So once this refactor of the more flexible and fluid sort of item persistence cache we have happens, it will enable us to not have to do that, and we can be much more, because the only reason why, like when you, sometimes that we wipe the database because some of the data schemas have changed for like how we're storing item data and stuff like that. But the new setup, we don't need to do that with, and that's one of the reasons. So like the money you earn, or the items you've gained, or the ships you've earned in the game, you can persist from patch to patch. So our goal is, like, basically, even if we roll out a new patch, we're not wiping the database. Now, we'll reserve the right to go in there and make some unilateral like fixes in case there was an exploit and everybody like earned a bunch of money. We would earn the right to say, I'm sorry, we're gonna have to take that money back and those items you bought with it back. But the goal would be, people should be able to play, keep their character going from patch to patch, not have to start from the scratch again, because it's quite, it's fairly frustrating. It's like Demon Souls. It's like, oh, well, I died. I got to start from the beginning again, go all the way through. So we want, because right now the motivation for you to be earning money so you can buy that ship or whatever, or buy the item goes away, is not so great as the new patch is coming up, because okay, well, I get it and I'm going to lose it anyway. So we want to be able to persist that. And then of course there's things like, additional sort of insurance, like item insurance. So again, like I bought my gun and I get some extra item insurance, and I lose it, then I can have a chance of getting it back. So I think those are all things that would encourage people even now, even though the game isn't fully finished, to be playing it like it's a finished game and building up their possessions and character and really engaging.
Right. So while we're on the big pillar talk stuff, I think it'll help if we can put this in some kind of order. I think we've got server-side object container streaming.
Yep.
We've got server meshing.
Yep.
We've got our persistence database refactor. Is there an order to these? Obviously, the server meshing relies on the object container.
So the object container streaming,
what's the order?
The server stuff's happening now, and the persistent stuff is being worked on now. The tasks are happening in this coming quarter and the quarter afterwards. And then the first stage of the object, the sort of meshing is sort of some ways hand in hand, because the problem is, like, even if you're streaming on the server, right, and you don't load everything in, but if I have players that are in 50 different locations and they've hit every area of the content, that server will have had all those areas streamed in. So it's going to be spending the same amount of processing power that it's currently spending right now. If the players distribute themselves all over the way. So the way it really becomes effective is when you sort of say, you as a server, you're only really focusing on this area and then only has that part of the area loaded in. So the server object container streaming and that aspect of it will come pretty quickly together. You got to have the streaming aspect there so you can just load in this place. Right. But then what you need to do beyond that is just say, okay, and then you need the handoff mechanism. So a ship can hand off from one server, say, taking care of Hurston, to the server taking care of general space, to the server taking care of ArcCorp, for instance. But I would say, expect to see the persistent changes come. We're hoping to. I'm not going to say. I have to go take a look at the roadmap. But these are all things that we're working towards this year.
And this is how we get more than 50 players in an instance and stuff like that.
Well, definitely, yeah. I depending on where we were and what we're doing on the server, we could quite easily do more than 50 players right now, because we've made a bunch of performance in. So, like, if you had for instance, we could do, if we were doing a sort of game mode, like Arena, Commander, Star Marine, we could probably have a mode that had 100 players, because we wouldn't have this huge system that we have to simulate on the server. And we've made a huge amount of performance improvements, because we know we have to scale for this huge PU universe. So as long as you don't have to simulate all that, then the server would actually be the processing and for the individual players or clients wouldn't be so relevant. So you could potentially see us have a game mode that could have more players than 50 in a more limited fashion, and then on the main PU side, that will sort of depend on the back-end server side. When we get the back-end server side in the way I've described, then we can up the player count too.
That is not the same as confirming or hinting at a battle royale mode.
We're not doing a battle royale. We're not doing a battle royale mode.
It's one thing to say that we have the tech to do something, not to say that we're planning to do something.
No, we're not planning on doing that. But we are looking at ways to make Arena Commander and Star Marine, like I think, well, you had it in ATV yesterday, but like we want to make those relevant again. So we want people, because the difference is it's like, you may want to practice dogfighting, you may want to practice, your FPS skills, and not do it in a situation that you're going to, lose things that you've earned in the PU. And then the other thing that we're quite keen on is like some of the cool stuff, like we see, like I don't know, Rexilla puts together like cool games or whatever. It would be nice to sort of facilitate that sort of interaction or game experience happening for our community. So those are all things we've talked about. Nothing is happening right way, promised anything, but those are all things that we're interested in doing, and could do some interesting stuff because of the ability that all these performance improvements that we've done over the last few patches to enable like the PU growing to the size it has. It's like anyone knows, if you play Arena Commander, I think it's just locked at 60 frames a second, just as is Star Marine.
Right.
So there's potential.
While we're on the topic of big tech questions, VR, man. We've been talking about VR forever.
I know. Well, so we got to get Vulkan in first. Once Vulkan's in, which we've started to do some of the early setup work for it, then VR would be after Vulkan. But we need to get Vulkan in, which will sort of.
Now, what does Vulkan get us?
Well, so right now, even though yes, we have some performance issues in quite a few areas, we can also be render bound, and we're partly render bound because of just the complexity of the scenes and the fact that the DX11 and how you talk to the graphics card is not as conducive to a sort of multi-core, multi-threaded situation. And so once we move to Vulkan, you can do that. So you can have a lot more what you would call draw calls, right? So you can have a huge amount of, like right now we do a lot of like special tricks on the graphics and art side to have very detailed objects, but actually keep our draw call count down, right? So we sort of, I think, normally aim to have like 5,000 or less draw calls on the screen at any time. With Vulkan, you can have 50,000. It's just have a lot more. So the fidelity of the scenes can be greater. We have to maybe potentially not jump through quite as many sort of hoops or do as many tricks, so it will allow the game to grow. And then importantly, if you're doing something like VR, well, of course you're rendering like left and right eye, so you're rendering twice. Right. So you're doubling up your, like if you're constrained on the render side, you're doubly constrained up on that side. So Vulkan will, with a powerful machine, help you to be able to render proper VR at a decent frame rate that you would need not to get like motion sickness. So Vulkan first, then it would be VR.
All right. That's all the big tech questions I have. Let's go back to some gameplay and some just world building stuff. A backer by the name of Tyler Witkin wants to know what your thoughts on Hawaiian shirts are. Nope, don't answer.
I don't mind them.
We're just going to
skip
it. Nope. Let's talk about Mission Givers. 3.5 added Tisha Pacheco. Everybody says it differently. All of our Mission Givers so far have been. Well, the question from the backer says kind of scummy.
Yeah.
Will there ever be legitimate?
Yes, there definitely will be definite legitimate ones. I mean, there are actually already some that we've recorded and shot. They're just not in the game yet. Like for instance, on ArcCorp, I believe there's a blackjack security rep that will give you sort of more lawful, missions from ArcCorp's standpoint. Definitely on Microtech there will be. I mean, Constantine Hurston really is kind of a representative of the Hurston setup. He's
a jerk. He's not evil or anything.
Yes. And longer term, you'll be able to get missions from, like, say, for instance, the advocacy, or perhaps the UE military will reach out to you for something. So we're going to have both. We're going to have all sides of the spectrum, both legal and illegal, law and chaos, so to speak. That's it. Just the implementation of the mission givers. We're working on that pipeline to make it more efficient, make the sort of AI logic better. So once we've got that down better, we should be able to turn out more of them. So there's a lot of things that you see in the current PU that are sort of the first step or stage, but we're also thinking, okay, well, how do we scale this so we can just do this across many star systems, many stuff, without having it also painful or brute force. And so that's kind of a lot of what you're seeing in the Stanton system is like us doing this and then figuring out how we can, do it much more efficiently at more scale.
Let's talk about ground traffic, roads. We've got 5 moons. Yeah, 5 moons right now, 2 planets. Not a lot of roads.
Yes, well, we should get roads in. The planet team actually implemented the road, what they call the road tool, where you can draw roads on a planet 2 years ago, and then the environment guys never used it. And then by the time the environment guys, everyone said, hey, there's some roads, they went and it was broken in the editor and everyone had so many things they didn't fix. But it is on our list to address kind of roads, because we actually had it in the system, and then it kind of broke with some of the changes because they keep on reformatting the procedural planet stuff. So I would anticipate some point in the future that there will be roads. I'm not 100% sure on where you'll be seeing that yet, because I would suspect even with Microtech, the first iteration would not really have the roads in.
Probably not Crusader.
And Crusader definitely won't, but so sometime next year. But yes, there is actually support for that. We want roads, rivers. There's a whole stuff. We have a whole backlog on the procedural planet stuff of the various features we are going to support. I mean, some of them we saw some previews of with the caves, which could be quite interesting to add additional sort of adventures and content that you have in the game. So it's just an ongoing process. I mean, like I said, every one of our teams has a 2-year backlog of really cool tasks that I'd love to see in the game now.
Yeah.
And it's mostly because we've just said, okay, we're building this at this level of fidelity, and you pretty much can do anything, and we want to make it systemic, and we want to give everyone that experience that everyone fantasizes and talks about. And I feel like every release we get a little closer to it, and it's really just kind of cool.
So you're saying that where we're going, we need roads.
Yes, that's right.
Don't boo my Back to the Future reference. I don't make the puns very often. All right, everybody that's playing...
We don't need roads. We will have roads.
Everybody that's playing 3.5 right now is doing so on our public test universe. One of the big features of our public test universe is the issue council.
Yep.
And I was impressed to see this question come. So everybody who's played it and who's asking questions have done it through the PTU at the moment. One of the questions that got voted up that I thought was really cool. What are your thoughts on the issue council? Are you satisfied with it? Is it useful? Does the community use it enough? Do they use it well? This person just wants feedback on their feedback.
Yeah, no, it's super useful. So we, in all our PTU releases, Bior, Michael Smith, who sort of heads up that aspect, is we have every release there's a whole sort of player feedback analysis that we do internally, and we're listing the top issues and features, and there's linking to discussions of it, and the issue council repeats of it, and we can look at the bugs, and they get passed on to our developers to fix, and then they get converted into our internal JIRAs. So it's super useful. I mean, it's great. I mean, the PTU is, we have this huge, group of completely enthusiastic and committed game players that are helping. I mean, you can get super insular when you're developing something, and it's, all the testers are used to stuff. They've seen it from all the internal testing they've done. And so it's really nice to get feedback from outside people. And there's plenty of issues that come up that we don't see internally, that we only see in sort of the PTU environment or even the public environment.
All right, we are almost out of time, so I want to get a couple more of these in before I let you go. This one says, party members can access our ships without us unlocking them. They can manage power. They can manage the shields, the heat on our ship's MFDs from the copilots. But what's keeping them from being able to call in a landing pad or set jump points? It seems like the copilot gameplay is halfway there. They can do half the things we would think they do, but they can't do the other half. What's stopping us here?
Well, I mean, so on the multi-crew side, we have a whole bunch of functionality that is on our backlog and that we will be implementing later on this year. That involves, the ability, like, okay, I'm the captain of the ship. I'm going to give you rights to be the comms officer, and I'm going to give, JJ rights to be the weapons officer, and I'm going to. And I'm gonna, I'll give you access to this part of the ship, but not this other part of the ship. So there's a whole area where, like, the captain can sort of, grant access and control to various people, and it would encompass pretty much all the functionality. So the problem is right now is that we've just got like a very basic, like, I think we sort of said, well, we lock the ship unless you're part of the group, right? So. But that needs to be, like, as a captain, I could have an option and say, I'm only going to give access to you, not a group. Or I can say, this whole group, or, we could even have things where the captain could say, oh, I want the code to enter the ship on the little keypad is, 1, 2, 3, 4. And then as everyone knows it's 1, 2, 3, 4, they can key it in and enter in. So there'll be, that functionality is planned, it's on our backlog, it just comes in with sort of our multi-crew stuff. Which will be showing up on the roadmap that we'll be sharing going forward.
Cool. Yeah, that was my next question. When can we start seeing some multi-crew stuff? So I know our next big update to the roadmap is probably next week, I think, scheduled.
So there may be something involving multi-crew on that.
Let's see. Let's talk about the ArcCorp visuals. Before 3.5 here, we last saw ArcCorp. Was it CitizenCon 2017? 2017. The view from orbit changed quite a bit. Changed quite a bit. Talk to us about why that happened.
Well, the view from orbit that you see now is actually the proper view of the planet. In the 2017 version, we didn't have a way of distilling that down, so we had a texture, admittedly a cool texture, that was swapped out when you got to a certain level. But right now, it's much more like if you actually do the fly down, the transitions are much better, and you can actually see Area 18 properly from space. And even that level of stuff is some of the stuff that we're talking about improving going forward with the ArcCorp stuff. But what you have now is you can go everywhere, and there's nothing like brushed over or faked. In the 17 demo, we did a lot of stuff, but like there was definitely, if you went off the track of the demo, it wouldn't look as nice. No. And that aerial shot looking down it was like a texture with a nice loom thing on it, versus what we have now is made up of like the different like procedural areas, plus you can see Area 18 and stuff like that. So the new way is a more accurate way than we had in 17. It doesn't work as well in the individual screenshot because everyone loves Coruscant, which is what we modeled that texture after, but Area 18 isn't set up like Coruscant. It hasn't got these concentric circles or anything like that.
Yeah, you said I got nothing to add to that. One final question is anything you can tell us about organizations? We get asked about organizations a lot. We first introduced the organization system some time ago. They're not actually in-game. The organizations aren't represented in-game. One of the questions that got voted up was about org buildings, org hangars, the ability to share ships among org members. Is there anything that we can talk about?
Yeah, that's high on our priority list. I mean, that's along the same lines of stuff that I was talking about for multiplayer gameplay. It's also factors into the FOIP stuff. Right now, we still haven't got the proper full functionality, because you should be able to, like, say you're doing FOIP or VoIP, you can walk into a bar and everyone in your vicinity can hear you, but you can also be on a comms channel to your buddies, like I say, over radio. But right now you're either in one or the other one, and it's kind of a bit clumsy. And so these are all things that they have to do some refactoring on the back-end services to allow like multiple channels at once, but we'll fix that. And on the org side, it's having like permissions and on a group basis. So we have a whole bunch of stuff that we have plans for that say, yeah, okay, like if you're a member of this organization, you'll have access to this location, or hey, as an organization, we could purchase a place, and then all the other people that are part of the organization are given access to, which is again not dissimilar to the way I was describing the multi-crew ship captain behavior. So we want to fully bring the org stuff across into the game. That's always been the goal. That was the first step of like getting the Spectrum partly integrated with what we did, and we haven't finished that off yet. So that is on our sort of roadmap. It's on our backlog, again, it's just we have 540 people, and it doesn't seem like it's enough, and they've all got loads of work. It does become more complicated because as the game becomes bigger and has more features, just adding new ones becomes more complicated because you've got to test it with more things, and you've already got an existing game. So in some ways, the trajectory of like how long it takes to get a feature in is longer now than it would have been, say, 4 or 5 years ago, where you didn't have all this this whole inertia and momentum of the current code base and the current functionality. I mean, just if you think about it, like if we change one aspect, say on a ship, right? Like we say, okay, you know what, we want to make the thruster effects better. Let's redo our effects manager for the thrusters, right? There are 80 plus functioning ships right now, so that effects team has to go in to every one of those ships and change it out. It's the same if like we change how like landing gear work, and that's what happens as the game gets bigger and you change the system over, or you improve a system or add a new system. You have to also make sure it works with this huge amount of stuff that already is there, and so it just makes things it just take a little. The testing takes longer. A lot of the work takes longer than you would think it is because of the just sheer scale. So in some ways we're prisoner to our own, I don't know whether you'd call it success, but our own ambition there. I feel like all these things we're talking about we have them on our roadmap. They're in our backlog and we're just knocking them out. I wish we could knock them out a little quicker, but I think at this point it's sort of the trajectory is the trajectory. I mean, you can even see now like 3.5 has actually a lot of stuff in it. We have a female player which had a huge, it was. I know you can say, oh well, it's just a different character, but it's not, because the dimensions are different. Usually in a lot of games, the female character and the male character are exactly the same size. It's the same skeleton. It's just a different skin. That's not the same for us. We actually we change the proportions and everything to be more sort of accurate to the differences between male and female. And so that had a whole bunch of knock-on effects, right? So we had to deal with, cockpits or sitting down or using things. It's because, it's a matter of like reach, and that's why you have sliding seats in cars and stuff like that. And so that took a lot. And then of course there was all this equipment, all the armor you had, that all had to be like changed to have the version that would fit on a female character versus a male character. That's a massive amount. And then there's ArcCorp, which is obviously a whole new planet, and there was a bunch of some of the new tech for the buildings, and and we're still not even close to like how we end up one of that. And then the DNA, which is a massive thing, the face customizer, completely different. I mean, like you may think, oh, I've seen that in other MMOs, but like that system underneath it is a completely different approach than almost any other MMO. Well, any other MMO uses at the moment, and it has one
loading in every face
Protoss rug that all is blended together, and then so you don't have the crazy monster creatures that you sometimes see people throw up on YouTube and stuff. And we've actually got some improvements, like we can do asymmetry with it. And you can't do it right now, but in 3.6, very likely we can make you do asymmetry. So you can make some ugly people, but they would be potentially ugly people.
Sloth and Goonies.
So you have that. So that's massive. The flight model, that was a huge engineering. And then speaking of ships, so like, this is, a lot of what the fallout is on some of the flight model stuff is, like we've changed our flight model and everything has to be redone and rebalanced. And then of course the heat management and all these systems and all these items are on. So you're talking, hundreds, if not thousands of items and, almost 100 different ships. It's just, so not only do you change it, but then you have to redo it and rebalance it. So, that's a lot to deliver. So I'm really proud of like how much everyone's delivered for this quarter. It's really impressive. And they've added a bunch of like extra mission stuff, which I think is like, I think maybe today's PTU has even new spoofing bounty hunter mission stuff that wasn't in any other PTU. There's a lot of gameplay, there's a lot of functionality that's going into this, and of course we're also making quality of life and visual improvements. So it's I feel like we have a good team and we've got a good pace. We're still trying to bring more people on board to help shore up some of the areas that we know we need some help. But it's kind of exciting. I mean, I would say look at other games that are sort of doing a live release update, and are they really doing as much as we're doing every patch in terms of content and features? And I would say probably not. And of course, not many other people have 500 odd people working on it, but it's good. So we got a pace. Like I said, I wish it was a bit quicker, but I think it's what it is considering the scale and the complexity and the detail of what we're working on. And everyone loves what they're doing and they're working really hard to deliver it. So hopefully you guys enjoy it. There you go.
I got nothing else to add. Chris, I'm going to let you get back to work. Thank you so much for taking your time to be here with us today.
You're welcome.
So that's it. That's Chris Roberts.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for listening, watching, and supporting the game. So keep up with the good work. There you go.
I don't have anything to say. I'll see you next week, everybody.
All right. Bye. Thanks for watching. For the latest and greatest in Star Citizen and Squadron 42, you can subscribe to our channel, or you can check out some of the other shows, and you can also head to our website at www.robertsspaceindustries.com. Thank you very much for watching.